We would welcome Dr. Anantha Nageshwaran, the Chief Economic Advisor to the government. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
We looked at your report. It shows that India is likely to grow close to 7% next year. Now, if you have to look at the biggest risk to that outlook, what would that be?
Two risks, one could say. One is that the global geopolitical disturbances become large enough to disrupt trade flows and also disrupt the flow of raw materials for us. The second risk would be that the private sector capital formation doesn't grow at the rate at which we think it should grow next year. It will grow,
sure,
but the question is the rate of increase. These two will, and naturally that will have its implications for employment generation and consumption growth, etc. So these two will be the principal risk factors.
And in the report, I think one more interesting part that we saw was on consumption. You said the robust growth is based on consumption that you're looking for
in the last 2 years. In 2021-22 and 22-23, we had very good consumption growth.
Correct, but you also expect that to continue in the next.
But we know that in the first, in the estimate, a preliminary estimate that MOSPI put out, consumption growth is pegged at 4.4%. Right. But this is some sort of a reaction to the high base that was set up by the previous 2 years of growth. Right. But we are getting anecdotal evidence, and you look at, for example, the sale of all kinds of passenger vehicles, starting from two-wheelers to four-wheelers, commercial vehicles and tractors, etc. The automobile producers of all classes had a very good year in 2023, and their inventories are low. And you see the launches of new residential properties, etc. And even at the rural level, I think what we are getting in terms of information from companies which cater to that population, some sort of discretionary spending by rural households is showing signs of revival. I think the last 2-3 years, when we had a reverse migration from urban India to rural India because of COVID, I think that is beginning to sort of go back to the original trends. Right. And that would in turn accelerate income flows from urban to rural India and then helping their consumption to pick up as well. So I think this process should accelerate in the course of FY25.
So just going back on that point, you spoke about how you expect that although the initial estimates said a little bit of a difficulty that in consumption, but you did say that you expect it to grow. Now let's take a slightly different take, and what would the risks be if that doesn't happen?
No, I think the risk is what I mentioned to you, that if private sector investment growth doesn't happen, right, then it will lead to lower employment generation, income growth, and therefore the consumption growth will be lower. So in that sense, that would then naturally have an impact on the overall economic growth as well.
So if that does translate, do you have a number for GDP that you think?
No, I think it will be too early to work out those kinds of scenarios and modeling, but we'll be doing that, yeah.
Right. The other part was the government's clear direction in terms of bringing down the fiscal deficit to 5.1, which was very good, surprising, but good, and then to about 4.5% the following year, below 4.5%, I think.
Yeah, 4.5% or below is what she mentioned in her speech as well, the Honorable Minister.
Right. At the same time, CapEx expenditure is another record, expected to be another
That's
record,
right,
estimated to be another record.
Right.
So, how do you think the government's going to balance that?
Balance what?
Increasing spending as well as cutting down on deficit at the same time.
I mean, the fact is 5.1% was calculated after taking into account the 11% increase in capital expenditure over the BE of FY24. So it is not that we committed to 5.1 and then afterwards we increased 11%. It is both were simultaneous exercises.
Of course. No, but do you think that, I mean, when I look at just as numbers, it looks a little difficult to get to 4.5 after 5.1.
No. On the contrary, what I would say is the 5.1, first of all, is not built on ambitious growth estimates or revenue.
It's on 7%,
or revenue,
close to 7%.
No, the nominal GDP growth assumption by budget makers was about 10.5%. and it could be 6.5 and 3.8 inflation. So actually 10.5 is, and especially after the nominal GDP growth this year might be closer to 9% because WPI, the wholesale price index, has been trending lower and it has stopped now. It is beginning to come back, but the base effect will not be as unfavorable as it was this year, and therefore there will be a slightly faster increase in WPI inflation, which is what feeds into the GDP deflator. So 10.5% is not an ambitious or unrealistic growth number, and the revenue projections are also not unrealistic. So in that sense, 5.1 itself is not an ambitious deficit target, it's a realistic deficit target. So if the economy continues to maintain the momentum and grows even in FY26, for example, at around 6.5%, and again nominally at 11% or 10.5%, it will not be difficult to achieve a fiscal deficit of 4.5% or lower.
Right. Interesting. Now, the other part was on the 1 lakh crore allocation to research, like the loans, 50-year loans that was announced. What's your take on that?
No, I think first of all, that is not going to be spent in 1 year. That is a corpus that will be set up, and that corpus, which will be run, as the finance secretary explained in the press conference, it will be done through maybe a special purpose vehicle. But that vehicle will get either that 1 lakh crore as interest-free loan or at very low interest rates, which in turn will supplement it by raising funds from the market, will then be farming it out as either loans or equity participation to deserving research and innovation. Those details have to be worked out, and those could be given over longer tenors. So this entire 1 lakh crore is not expected to be...
No, it's not just about the outlets, it's all the thought.
Yeah, it is all about ensuring that many of the sunrise sectors and industries which will arise in the wake of, for example, in the wake of India now, let's say, getting semiconductor capabilities in the course of the current calendar year, and also with the advent of artificial intelligence, there could be a lot of offshoots that we need to be investing. And the third area is with respect to energy transition and climate, global warming and climate change. So there are technologies related to battery storage, grid stability, green hydrogen, etc., which we need to invest in. Or for that matter, turning the coal into slightly less emitting, green ammonia. All those things are there, and I think we may need to invest in original innovations in these areas. And that is the mindset with which this has been set up. That is why it was very clearly mentioned that these grants will be provided for longer tenors. Grants or loans will be provided for much longer tenors than standard 3 or 5 or 7 years, because we know that these things might take longer time to come to fruition.
Sure. It's a thought. You've laid a slight kind of a plan and a direction. Right. Now, another question is, there's a lot of focus on the middle class, the lower strata of the middle class as well. Which measures do you think will help benefit this class particularly?
No, obviously, what government did not announce specifically any measure at this, but the government did give indications about, for example, the lower middle class and the lower income classes will benefit from the expansion of the affordable housing scheme, where the minister said 3 crore houses are close to being completed, additional 2 crores will be built. And then she also mentioned about the self-help groups and the Lakpati Didis, where she's proposing to extend the target by another 1 crore over there. And then in the last 10 years, the setting up of expanding the availability of seats in medical colleges, management institutions, IITs and ITIs, those are already helping the middle class because the gross enrollment ratio, both in secondary and tertiary education, is picking up. And she also announced in the budget setting up of medical colleges aligned with hospitals. I think those are the important measures that will definitely help the middle class.
And what about the MSME sector? I mean, what measures do you think are helping that? Because that's the lifeblood of jobs in India, for example.
Sure.
Right?
MSME sectors have been consistent focus of attention because right from the 2014 year, I think government defraying the contributions made by smaller businesses for hiring employees, contributions to the EPFO, the employer share was borne by the government. And then we came up with the emergency credit line guarantee scheme during the pandemic for MSMEs. And large corporations, where it was made mandatory for them to discount their bills in trade receivables exchanges, so that MSMEs will get their payments on time. There is a new program called GST Sahay, which the Small Industries Development Bank of India will be launching, where MSMEs can use their GST invoices as collateral to get working capital loans. If the buyer has accepted the invoice, then it can be used as a collateral. And then
like a banknote kind of a thing.
Exactly. And then the more important thing was in the last budget, when the honorable minister announced that large businesses cannot claim as expenditure payments that they owe to their MSME suppliers unless they are paid actually, rather than on an accrual basis. And then the innovation of account aggregator, which enables MSMEs to share information between the various financial institutions, and also even activities such as GST, etc., all become digital financial footprints to be shared with the financial institutions. That gives them a good handle on the MSMEs and the promoters' underlying financial strength, so they could get loans on the basis of cash flows rather than on the basis of collaterals. So these are the steps that are taken, but on top of that, the minister specifically mentioned that MSMEs have to be strengthened to be able to grow and compete globally. And she also mentioned that the regulatory environment will have to be aligned to make it easier for MSMEs, because for that, the regulatory environment in the country, both at the national and subnational government level, has to become more principle-based than prescriptive.
And what about measures to help private sectors increase their capital expenditures? I mean, the government's doing its bit, but what about?
Well, I think the private sector faces one of the most reasonable tax structures in the world at 22%. And then for the last 3 years, we had a special provision for new manufacturing enterprises whose deadline was extended by a couple of years. So I think, and more importantly, the government has strengthened the financial sector with balance sheets improvement of all the banking companies, especially public sector banks. So private sector now has access to credit from a well-functioning and healthier banking system. So these are the most important steps that the government has taken. Now it is up to, and more importantly, the private sector is sitting on net financial savings of a surplus. Right. So they have enough cash to invest.
But do they have the motivation to do so?
They are, because if I look at the data,
right,
listed corporate entities have already begun to invest, and I see an increase in the last 3 years, year on year, after the COVID year of 2021. So 22 and 22-23, I have seen increase in the capital formation undertaken by the listed private companies.
What about international investors?
And I mean, obviously, in 22-23 and 23-24, we have seen slight declines in the foreign equity investment inflows. But actually, in October and November, these have sort of shown a reversal. But this is occurring in the context of the overall slowdown in global FDI.
Correct.
Because interest rates went up in the developed world. So you may feel, if I get 5% by putting my money in a safe deposit, why do you have to take a big risk of going elsewhere? So that is one consideration. But equally, India's FPI flows turned extremely positive this year. So we have received in the current financial year up to $31 billion already. Up to February. So in that sense, both together constitute the overall investment flows, and India in that case has been receiving them quite well without much of a disruption. And you look at the UNCTAD World Investment Report, which comes out every year annually, and they do mention that in terms of greenfield announcements, India is right on the top of all investors' radar.
If we have to look at the digital public infrastructure, how do you think that has helped in inclusion? One, two, where do you see this going? I mean, we were the innovators in that sense, but what's next?
It's difficult for me. I'm not a technologist to be able to predict the next step in the innovation. I think, we are talking about the open network digital commerce. ONDC is the next important innovation, and the open credit enablement network, both of which are in the initial stages, both are very important next steps in this process. But in terms of how it is helping, and that is exactly why I mentioned about account aggregator. Right. And that is the digital
This is for the
infrastructure.
MSMEs, when we spoke about the MSMEs.
Especially, and it is capturing the financial footprints and transactions of individuals and businesses so that they can use it to sort of get credit where they wouldn't have before. Right. So that is the digital public infrastructure is enabling both formalization of the economy and financial inclusion simultaneously.
So how much of that has influenced your outlook, you think?
Well, for example, I personally am confident that India's potential GDP growth is between 6.5% and 7% rather than between 6 and 6.5% as many international institutions reckon.
Yeah,
and I attribute it to the fact that we have now far better balance sheets in the banking system, which will result in higher capital formation on top of what the government has built already. And the second reason is the digital public infrastructure is going to bring in more people into the formal economy, and that will only boost the economic efficiency.
Right. Just on that. So you said between 6.5 and 7, and is it closer to 7 or closer to 6.5?
It's very difficult to say. I think it's kind of, in the long run, this would be amount to a little bit of hair splitting. So I won't get into that. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Thank you for your time, sir.
You're welcome.